Section 28 of Revelations of a Wife. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Mary Rhodey. Revelations of a Wife by Adele Garrison. Chapter 28. A Dark Night and a Troubled Dawn. "How many more trains are there tonight?" Lillian Underwood's voice was sharp with anxiety. My voice reflected worry as I answered her query. "Two, one at 12:30 and the last, until morning, 2 o'clock." "Well, I suppose we might as well lie down and get some sleep. They probably will be out on the last train." "You don't suppose," I began, then stopped, "that they've slipped off the water wagon?" Lillian returned grimly. "That's just what I'm afraid of. We will know in a little while, anyway. Harry will begin to telephone me, and keep it up until he gets too lazy to remember the number. Come on, let's get off these clothes and get into comfortable negligees. We probably shall have a long night of worry before us." I obeyed her suggestion, and I was wild with an anxiety which Lillian did not suspect. My question, which she had finished for me, had not meant what she had thought at all. In fact, until she spoke of it, that possibility had not occurred to me. It was a far different fear that was gripping me. I was afraid that Grace Draper had failed to keep the bargain she had made with Lillian to keep out of Dicky's way, in return for Lillian's silence concerning the Draper girl's mad attempt to drown me during our desert island picnic. Whether or not my narrow escape from death had brought Dicky to a realization of what we meant to each other, I could not tell. At any rate, he never had been more my royal lover than in the 5 days since my accident. Indeed, since that day he had made but one trip to the city beside this with Harry Underwood, the return from which we were so anxiously awaiting. When the men left in the morning they had told us not to plan dinner at home, but to be ready to accompany them to a nearby resort for a shore dinner, as they were coming out on the 5 o'clock train. No wonder that at 10:30 Lillian and I were both anxious and irritated. Dicky's behavior toward me, since death so nearly gripped me, certainly had given me no reason to doubt that his infatuation for Grace Draper was at an end. But no one except myself knew how apparently strong her hold had been on Dicky through the weeks of the late summer, nor how ruthless her own mad passion for him was. Had she reconsidered her bargain? Was she making one last attempt to regain her hold upon Dicky? The telephone suddenly rang out its insistent summons. I ran to it, but Lillian brushed past me and took the receiver from my trembling hand. I sank down on the stairs and clutched the stair rail tightly with both hands to keep from falling. "Yes, yes, this is Lil, Harry. What's the matter?" "Seriously? Where are you?" "Yes, we were coming anyway. Yes, we'll bring Miss Draper's sister. Don't bother to meet us. We'll take a taxi straight from the station." Staggering with terror, I caught her hand and prevented her putting the receiver back on its hook. "Is Dicky dead?" I demanded. "No, no, child," she said soothingly. "I don't believe it," I cried, maddened at my own fear. "Call him to the phone. Let me hear his voice myself, then I'll believe you." She took the receiver out of my grip, put it back upon the hook, and grasped my hands firmly, holding them as she would those of a hysterical child. "See here, Madge," she said sternly, "Dicky is very much alive, but he is hurt slightly and needs you. We have barely time to get Mrs. Gorman and that train. Hurry and get ready." Dicky's eager eyes looked up from his white face into mine. His voice, weak but thrilling with the old love note, repeated my name over and over, as if he could not say it enough. I sank on my knees beside the bed in which Dicky lay. I realized in a hazy sort of fashion that the room must be Harry Underwood's own bedchamber. But I spent no time in conjecture. All my being was fused in the one joyous certainty that Dicky was alive and in my arms, and that I had been assured he would get well. I laid my face against his cheek, shifted my arms so that no weight should rest against his bandaged left shoulder, which, at my first glimpse of it, had caused me to shudder involuntarily. "If you only knew how awful I felt about this," Dicky murmured, contritely, and as I raised my eyes to look at him, his own contracted as with pain. "It's a fine mess I've brought you into by my carelessness this summer, but I swear I didn't dream." I laid my hand on his lips. "Don't, sweetheart," I pleaded. "It is enough for me to know that you are safe in my arms. Nothing else in the world matters. Just rest and get well for me." He kissed the hand against his lips, then reached up the unbandaged arm and with gentle fingers pulled mine away. "But there is one thing I must talk about," he said solemnly. "Something you must do for me, Madge, for I cannot get up from here to see to it. It's a hard thing to ask you to do, but you are so brave and true, I know you will understand. Tell me, is that poor girl going to die?" "I I don't know, Dicky," I faltered, salving my conscience with the thought that he must not be excited with the knowledge of Grace Draper's true condition. "Poor girl," he sighed. "I never dreamt she looked at things in the light she did, but I feel guilty anyhow, responsible. She must have the best of care, Madge, best physicians, best nurses, everything. I must meet all expenses, even the ones which will be necessary if she should die." He brought out the last words fearfully. Little drops of moisture stood on his forehead. I saw that the shock of the girl's terrible act had unnerved him. Nerving myself to be as practical and matter of fact as possible, I wiped the moisture from his brow with my handkerchief and patted his cheek soothingly. "I will attend to everything," I promised, "just as if you were able to see to it. But you must do something for me in return. You must promise not to talk any more and try to go to sleep." "My own precious girl," he sighed happily, and then drowsily, "kiss me." I pressed my lips to his eyes closed, and with his hand clinging tightly to mine, he slept. How long I knelt there I do not know. No one came near the room, but through the closed door I could hear the hushed hurry and movement which marks a desperate fight between life and death. I felt numbed, bewildered. I tried to visualize what was happening outside the room, but I could not. I felt as if Dicky and I had come through some terrible shipwreck together and had been cast up on this friendly piece of shore. I knew that later I would have to face my own soul in a rigid inquisition as to how far I had been to blame for this tragedy. I had been married less than a year, and yet my husband was involved in a horrible complication like this. But my brain was too exhausted to follow that line of thought. I was content to rest quietly on my knees by the side of Dicky's bed, with his hand in mine and my eyes fixed on his white face with the long lashes shadowing it. At first I was perfectly comfortable, then after a while little tingling pains began to run through my back and limbs. I dared not change my position for fear of disturbing Dicky, so I set my teeth and endured the discomfort. The sharpness of the pain gradually wore away as the minutes went by, and was succeeded by a distressing feeling of numbness extending all over my body. Just as I was beginning to feel that the numbness must soon extend to my brain, the door opened and someone came quietly in. My back was to the door, and so carefully were the footsteps crossing the room that I could not tell who the newcomer was until I felt a firm hand gently unclasping my nervous fingers from Dicky's. Then I looked up into the solicitous face of Dr. Pettit. "How is it that you have been left alone here so long?" he inquired indignantly.